Move on to strategy and finance, which does have part A reports. And the first item, who have we got here for? Have we got any staff here for this item, strategy and finance? No? Okay. Well, I hope there aren't any difficult questions because the people that are here are going to have to answer them. Right. I did have a question on the first item on the residential land availability in Christchurch City. So let's, can we move on to the development contributions for family flats converted to second units? Is that an item that we could deal with as a council without staff here to answer questions? Yep, would you like to move that, Jamie? Seconded by... Anyone like to second that? Raf Manji? Is there any discussion? Yep. Yes. Paul? Oh, there are questions, are there?
Just a couple of questions. Just with regard to the...
No, but we haven't got any staff here, so that's why I asked the question, can we deal with this without questions to staff? So the answer to that is no. Let's move on to the next one, development contribution, Central City rebate scheme. Oh, here is Mike Teelan. We can come back to it. So we'll go back to the first one, which is the residential land availability in Christchurch City. Yeah, so the first item is the residential land availability, and it's receiving the report. The question I've got is kind of a repeat of a question that I've asked informally of staff, but I kind of want to formalise it. The greenfield priority areas identify that we have 19,775 potential sections available, and that of those, I can't tell how many. No, there are 11,770 that already have infrastructure available. Is that right? I mean, I can't. I'll tell you what I want, and then you can tell me whether it's possible. What I want is I want to have a map of Christchurch where land has been zoned for development, where and what stage each component of it is up to. So, for example, Preston's Road, owned by Ngaitahu on the north side, they are in the process of developing X number of sections. So, and that's all that's all infrastructured and everything's there. So it's kind of like, who owns it? Where is it up to in the process? Because what I'm concerned about is that there may be people who are sitting on land that has been zoned for development and they're not developing it. And I kind of like to, well, be blunt, call it out, because I think that Christchurch needs to have the land that has been made available ready for development. I mean, it's got to be ready. Are we holding it up because we haven't put the infrastructure in? Is the owner of the land not proceeding? That's what I want to know, and I want to be able to see that on a map so that we can regularly look at where things are up to. And I found it very difficult to compare the numbers in these different blocks because I couldn't tell if they were the same pieces of land. Is that possible?
Yes, that's possible in part. So it's possible, and we have, Mark and I have spoken about the fact that we'd like to modify the way this is presented because it's an awkward set of numbers to work your way through, and we certainly accept that. We can certainly identify, obviously, we've got the greenfields land in terms of priority areas. We can identify the zoning, we can identify which and what and the extent of infrastructure availability. What we don't, and we can demonstrate, we can map, but only historically, what subdivisions have been approved. What we don't have a good handle on, unless developers tell us, is which ones are actually prepared to put on the market, because we don't actually hold that information. We've tried a number of ways to look at how we might get that information in a de facto manner. So we can take that we can draw that picture so far. We can't get it to exactly what properties are on the market, even though we do actually run a website which invites developers to put on that how many sections they've got on and in which parts of the city.
But somebody else might do that job for us, not looking anywhere in particular. If we put the information out in the public arena, it will be obvious that there are questions to be asked around this development that hasn't proceeded. I mean, this area has been set aside for residential. You haven't done anything with it. The infrastructure's there. It's ready to go. Why?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that doesn't have to be a question we ask. There
Absolutely
are others
not.
who will ask that question. Yeah. Because, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion around land banking and ratcheting up of prices, and I think we've got to call it out. Yeah. Yanni.
If you turn to page 100,
That's not item
Yeah, it's
one?
the attachment.
Oh, it's the attachment, sorry.
So as I understand it, basically you've had 925 consents issued.
So can you just tell us which line you're pointing
The
to?
total greenfield priority areas. If you go across between those two in the middle of the page, under building consents issued, the total's 925, and you've got 1,200 sections that are basically waiting for infrastructure. So you take that out of the 20,000. So what it shows to me is you've only had 10% of the sections that could be built on, that could have building consents yesterday or today or tomorrow. You've only got 10% of the land that we've rezoned and provided infrastructure to being developed on, which seems absolutely extraordinary given our financial situation in terms of housing and the housing crisis that we have as a city.
So how is that different from what I just asked for?
Because you were saying you couldn't see what the numbers were. What I'm saying is I think the numbers
I
are
can't
shown.
see where they are. I can't see
In
who
here.
owns them.
I just wanted to confirm that that's the case, that there's basically, it's fair to say that about 10%, only 10% of the land that we rapidly rezoned and hurriedly built infrastructure to service, to deal with the housing crisis, only 10% of that has got building consents and has actually got activity happening on it in terms of housing.
That's correct, that 925 building consents have been issued in areas where there's 10,000 potential sections in zoned greenfield areas, but there's a range of reasons for why areas won't have developed. Infrastructure constraints limit the potential development of some of that 10,000 that's already been rezoned. So it's not necessarily land banking or other private constraints, it's potentially because of infrastructure constraints.
Which is why I asked for that.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see, is where it's us, you know, or the constraints within the...
But the other key issue is that those greenfield priority areas are, what, a 20-year horizon?
These greenfield priority areas are identified in the land use recovery plan to provide for demand through to 2028. So
you wouldn't expect. Sorry to cut across Mark. I mean, I suppose the issue that Councillor Johansson raises is right in the absolute sense, but obviously we wouldn't expect to see all of that land available now and immediately anyway, because we would there would not A, be the demand, and B, we wouldn't want to see all that land absorbed, because that land is far in excess of what we need to support demand today. It is over 10 years away.
Yeah, but what I'm struggling to understand is, and that's great, we're going to get the information back, which I appreciate, is the whole idea that we free up more land for development when we've got far too much land already, and we're not seeing development happening. So we've got a surplus of land that's able to be developed on, that isn't being developed, and yet every indication we're getting from central government through the district plan review is just free up more zones for development.
No.
No.
The message that we're getting from central government is that they want to see intensification in areas around key activity centres and in the CBD, which is actually in line with our own position. So I don't agree that government's putting pressure on to free up more. The land use recovery plan did identify, but it was a wider horizon. But I do want to see what's holding up the development of those areas.
I thought that government had been pretty clear that that councils were limiting land supply, which was driving things like child poverty.
No, they haven't said that to us at all.
Okay.
In fact, the land use recovery plan fast-tracked the RPS requirements that was going through an environment court process at the time of the earthquakes.
Thank you. So the other information that I've asked from the Mayor's office, which was the other thing that I think is really important for us to understand, is who's actually owning these houses. So how many people are actually owning a house? And when you think of things like affordability, I know the Mayor's office had some statistics around it looks like there's fewer people owning homes, but fewer people are owning more than one.
Hang on, I'm sorry, I'm just going to rule that out of order. This is a report on residential land availability in Christchurch City. It's got nothing to do with the houses that are built on them, other than that's what it's available for.
Yes,
so I'm just ruling that question out of order on this issue. You can raise it somewhere else. It just doesn't sit with this. This is not for our planners to answer.
Well, what's the process to get that information?
Well, if my office has got the information, just ask them for it.
I have.
Good. You'll get it.
But, I mean, okay. I won't debate it with you. That's fine.
Right. So, all right. Well, I shall... Jimmy?
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, but during the committee, I was unaware. I have one question, okay. On page 78 and page 79, these are two tables. I just don't know what's the relations. For instance, like a potential section, the subjection to the subdivision application, if compared to previous, then current is a drop for 21. However, if we review the subdivision consent is increased 36. I just don't know this relationship. If this number, if drop 21, should be the other column is increased 21. Because the timeline is June to November last year, am I right? Previous and the current.
That's right.
What's the difference? The 15 again. Any other source of land availability or not?
From memory, there was the sections consented within large greenfield areas like Aidenfield, Masham, and Westmoreland. Those areas which are largely developed out now, there was some duplication of previous figures presented, so there was a correction made to the potential number of sections in those greenfield areas.
Yes.
And that's why the increase of 21 differs from 36 due to some corrections from the last report.
Okay, duplicate. Okay. So how about the table on page 79? Is the same situation? The Q is 13,000, but current is reduced to the 11,000. Whether it means all those infrastructure constraint has been released, has been available now.
That reduction in the number of consent, in the number of sections with infrastructure constraints is due to the completion of pump station and pressure main infrastructure to support development of Awatea.
Okay. Yeah.
And there is still a planning constraint to the development of the southern part of the Awatea block on the southern side of the motorway.
Yes.
But that reduction of 1,600 reflects that implementation of the infrastructure to service that block now.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
So, Paul?
Just might not be the right question for this answer, but I'm just actually interested in the vacuum systems, waste systems, given some of the concerns in the east around the vacuum systems being installed. how are these being received by the developers and the new homeowners in these areas, this vacuum system?
It's probably something we can't answer. That's probably something for Jane perhaps, or the building consent guys to respond to.
It would be good to find out that information.
What was the issue?
Just the wastewater vacuum systems. You know, we've had a lot of issues. Some of the residents not wanting these installed in their properties because of concerns. I just want to know how they're actually being received by the developers and the new homeowners.
Oh, okay. Well, that's probably a separate issue.
I think it's a separate issue. I'll follow up and send her some information because it was not just that it's different systems.
Yep, that's good. Glenn?
Thank you. I'm curious as well about this supply situation, given that the theory suggested it was a supply side problem over housing in Christchurch, and there seems to be an abundance of supply here. I actually wonder, is it an affordable supply side problem? The Selwyn District Council's just zoned land that I was involved in backing a trust to try and get red zone residents there. It was turned down, quite some opposition to it. They've just zoned it for housing. When it comes to our approach to planning, what are the chances that we can take on board, you know, and one of our objectives in the accord with the Crown is to promote affordable housing. So what are the chances we can have that kind of nimbleness to take on board these initiatives so that part of these developments are affordable?
Well, I think
We've done that with Aotea, haven't we? Required some affordability and some affordable housing within that context.
that's something that the government has done as the landowner.
Yeah, but it's not Aotea, Spraydon. It's Spraydon. What's that one called?
Meadowlands.
Eh?
The Meadowlands development.
The Meadowlands development. And that was as an exemplar project. So that's the affordable housing really fits within that frame rather than within the land use.
Yes,
This is a land use report, so I'm trying to, I know you're trying to frame your question to fit within the context of the report, but I think it's not within the context of the report. Yeah.
I mean, I think that the simple axiom that somehow is out there that simply having lots and lots of land means cheaper sections is wrong.
It doesn't work.
It's never been right, and it's the opposite is right. In fact, if you don't have land, sections can rise, but it's not axiomatic in so much as if you have lots of land, it doesn't suddenly get cheaper.
Yeah.
And so if we're looking at affordability, we have to look at different levers than simply over-zoning.
Correct.
Construction costs, etc. It's an all-round.
There's a whole lot of things, ownership,
But I mean, as we've seen, we can make the land available. It doesn't mean that it gets developed.
That's right,
Yeah.
and so there is a natural progression in the process. So, you know, councils traditionally try and send long-term signals to the market about where they want to develop. That helps landowners start to make choices. It starts to guide our long-term infrastructure investment, and obviously we will deliver that infrastructure investment hopefully in a timely manner that actually enables the market to respond.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the process of setting that. And the government has moving in that direction across the country by trying to encourage councils. I think legislatively they're proposing to have minimum numbers of available land. But there's a difference between land, service land, sections on the market, and it's all part of the same bigger story.
Yeah. So I'll move the recommendation. Jamie, do you want to second that? I'll just note the second part of it, which is that the Productivity Commission is requested to meet with us to discuss their latest report on the link between land use and housing supply, and that's where I think some of the conversation that we've had here today will be incredibly useful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yanni. Yeah.
To get this information, and I think it categorically shows that that basically opening up more land doesn't deal with some of the key issues that we're facing as a city, and I really do think it's important to understand who's owning those houses that are being built, because they don't appear to be affordable, and it appears that what we're seeing is that we're opening up more land for fewer people to own more properties each, and for more people not to own a single property at all. So I think we do have to start looking at those other mechanisms as we rezone land that enables people to A, be able to afford their first home, and B, deal with the issues that we're facing in terms of the wider community benefit for our city. Now, I just have to say that it was really clear from the government that, according to Bill English, that worsening poverty and inequality was being caused by restricting land supply. And I think the information we've got in this report shows quite clearly that that is not the problem. The problem is getting development to occur on land that has been rezoned, and for whom. And I think we need to start looking at how we answer that fundamental question, because what we've seen is developments that aren't affordable and that are not happening when we've got a housing crisis in our city. So I think we do need to do a lot more work, and maybe as part of meeting with the Productivity Commission we can generate a report back to Council about some of these new ideas of thinking. But I appreciate the information. I just think we need to be realistic that opening up more land is not dealing with the problem that we have.
Vicky?
I think the report shows quite clearly what Mike has just said, that the rezoning land in and of itself does not actually reduce the price of housing, does not make housing affordable, and that we actually need to look at a raft of different initiatives that are much more complex and complicated than just changing the RMA Act or making more land available. I take the point that it works the other way, that if the land supply is constrained, that section prices and therefore house prices will go up, but it doesn't work in reverse. And that's why in the activity management plan that goes for discussion in the long-term plan, the new housing development unit, housing development agency that requires a name, will be involved in both social housing and take some action on, seeking to take some action on affordability of housing, because we have this really bizarre situation in Christchurch at the moment where some people are actually paying more in rent than they could afford, especially today as the interest rates have come down, to buy their own house for, but they cannot get the 10 or 20% deposit that they're required to. So there are some quite simple ways in which a number of agencies acting together could actually help people into homes, which is, I think, one of the goals that the community of Christchurch would want to achieve. It doesn't need to, definitely not at the ratepayer's expense, I totally buy that, but it does require a much more complex and much more of an array of solutions than the simple RMA changes or rezone more greenfields. We know that, we've seen that for the last year. So we know that the solutions are different than what's being promulgated.
Good. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you.